This episode is going to be very different than any of my other episodes. Normally, I either interview someone or I do a what I call a mic on the mic podcast where it's just me solo. And this time around, doing a little switch, and I'm actually being interviewed on the podcast. About a month ago, I was on a podcast called the Changing Minds podcast with one of my best friends in the world, Owen Fitzpatrick. And if you haven't listened to his Changing Minds podcast, go listen to it. But I was on his podcast where he interviewed me, and I was so pleased with how it came out and the conversation we had that I thought I would share it with you on this podcast as well. We talk about everything from polarization in the world today to leadership to aging to death, believe it or not, to the law of positive intent. I think there's some great stuff here. You will get to know me a little bit better, but more importantly than that, I really think you'll learn something from it. Great conversations. I hope you enjoy it. It feels like everybody's talking and nobody's listening, right?
Sorry, could you say that again? I'll stop
You
now.
see what he did?
Now, yeah.
The opinions are so strong that everybody's so focused on winning the argument. They're not focused on what the best answer is or the right answer. The best leaders are curious about what their team is thinking or curious about other ideas. But when it comes to the political arena, nobody's truly asking about what the other side believes and why they believe it. The other person is just trying to do the best they can with the resources they have. I call it the law of positive intent. I feel like there's a lot of people, as you start getting older, start looking back more than they look forward. They're looking back at what their life was. And, oh, I'll never have that again, or I'll never have that again. I'm not doing that. I have so much more to look forward to that I feel really positive about where I am and where I'm going. So my son, he grew up with some issues. He has, Asperger syndrome. We just couldn't communicate with each other. I learned that if I was having a good week at work or my good days, interestingly enough, he would have really good days. And on my bad days, he was a horror. Holy crap, was it him or was it me? Mm-hmm. That's when I started learning about this idea of believing in positive intent. It started with my son. I called my son down to my office and I debated doing this, but I said, Rich, I'm writing a speech and I want you to read it.
Oh God, okay.
And I frankly was not sure if this was a big mistake.
I'm nervous just listening to this. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Change Your Minds podcast. I'm interviewing a very dear friend of mine. Mike Goldman is a phenomenal author and speaker and consultant. He's been working for about 35 years, helping leadership teams. He coaches leadership teams, helping them to become a breakthrough leadership team and to optimize how effectively they're able to do the work that they do. Mike is someone I've had on the podcast before. In that particular episode, you'll learn a lot about Mike's philosophy around business. But today we're going to dive into the way in which Mike thinks about life and about business and about family and friendship and relationships. Because for me, one of the things that I'm fascinated with is how the way in which we think about the world determines our experience of the world. This is a really phenomenal and fun conversation. One of the things that I did want to get into was really starting to look at some of the differences that I've experienced in being in Ireland versus America. And it's very interesting to me the way in which they do things differently here. From your own perspective, what has been different over the last 20 years or so? Like, what has led us to a place where, as I think both would agree, things are ridiculously toxic online, in the media, in general, in terms especially around the politics in the States?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious answer, I'll go a little deep, the obvious answer is the level of polarization, right? And it feels
no, it's
like...
not. Sorry, I had to do that.
It feels like everybody's talking and nobody's listening, right?
Sorry, could you say that again? I'll stop now.
You see what he did?
Now, yeah.
But it feels everybody's talking and nobody's listening. The opinions are so strong that everybody's so focused on winning the argument. They're not focused on what the best answer is or the right answer, or it's actually listening to one of your podcasts and the idea of, it's black and it's white, right? It's not just black or white or it's gray. It's, there was two-party system has been around for a long time. But when I think about, I would say, pre-2000s, once in the United States, once a president was elected, you wanted to see that president be successful. You wanted the country to be successful. These days, it's more of if your guy or gal doesn't get elected, you want to do everything in your power to see them fail. And to me, that's the big difference. And social media, for all of the good it can do and good it's done, it's so easy for us to just get in this vacuum chamber of talking to people who believe exactly what we believe or the news. So that's, and I'm not saying anything we haven't heard a million times, but that's the biggest difference.
For me, the real trick, and again, we won't spend all the time talking about this, but the real issue is when people are on one side, they won't admit anything that the other side might agree with. And that's, to me, one of the biggest problems, is that if you're on the side of, let's say, the candidate on the left, you will not take anything that the candidate on the right says in any way and say it's true. If you're for the candidate on the right, you will not take anything the candidate. And to me, obviously, there's a lot of people that are a lot more rational. We don't often hear about them because they're not on social media. They're not absolutely 100% convinced of their perspective. So they're not screaming on the media and social media with their own narratives. But still, to me, that's the biggest thing. And I think in general in life, whenever you have a person that's absolutely convinced of a certain point of view and they're not willing to, find some sort of steelman argument of the other person's side, the idea that the other person has a strong argument in this context or that context, it effectively means that you're living in a different reality tunnel. It's like you're not able to hear another person because you're not looking to just make sure I'm right, you're wrong. It's like nothing you say is right. Everything I say is right.
And what a lot of it comes, and by the way, regardless of who says it, if your guy says something that is totally ridiculous, you're going to agree with it because it's your guy. But I think what's missing, and it relates to something that I actually coach leaders on all the time from a business standpoint, is the lack of curiosity. Like there's a book, Liz Wiseman wrote a great book called Multipliers. And one of the things she talks about is that she believes the most important quality of a leader, of a strong leader, is true intellectual curiosity. Like that's what it's about. And in business, the best leaders are curious about what their team is thinking, or curious about other ideas, or curious about the marketplace. But when it comes to the political arena, nobody's curious about, nobody's truly asking about what the other side believes and why they believe it. They may ask the question, but it's a question that's more of an interrogation type, so you're telling me what you believe. It's not really a question. It's basically saying you're a moron, but putting a question mark at the end. So I think curiosity has totally left the playing field.
I think with curiosity as well, from a DEI perspective, diversity, inclusivity and whatnot, I think curiosity should be the goal. But a lot of time it's like tolerance, or it's like, compliance. This is what we want to do. And what we really want people to do is whenever you see someone different to you, whether that's culturally different or, in any way, shape or form different, it's about learning to be curious about them. And this also extends politically to the different points of view. Because you mentioned the work you do with leadership teams, let me ask you, when you're working with a leadership team, and let's say two people on that leadership team absolutely hate each other, like can't stand each other, what is it that you're trying to do with the time that you have with them? Like, how do you try to get two people that just do not gel at all? How do you get them to respond favorably to each other, or at least get them to work together?
I'll start with what doesn't work. The communication techniques in quotes don't work, because I can say the right thing to someone or ask a question of someone, but if I think they're full of crap, that's going to come through in whatever I say, in my tone, in my body language. And I know in my own life, the techniques don't work. I learned a technique early on. So I had a business for 3 years, staffing and recruiting business. And I had 2 staffing supervisors working for me. And I had started to read a lot of business books. And I had learned that it's important not to think you're the smartest person in the room. Ask your team questions. Don't always dictate the answer. Ask them questions. So that's a great idea. I'm going to ask them questions. So I would ask questions, and I thought I was being this great leader. And I sat down with Jamie, who was one of my staffing supervisors and also a good friend who could be open and honest with me. And she said, Mike, I really wish you'd listen to us more. And I said, well, what are you talking about? I ask questions all the time. And she said, yeah, but we always come around to what you want. And what I realized is I had this technique to ask questions, but I still believed I was the smartest person in the room. So back to your question of 2 people.
It must have been a very dumb room.
Yeah, it was a really small room, not a lot of people. But to get back to your question of 2 people in conflict it's not about the technique, because if one person thinks the other person's is a pain in the neck or a moron or they're up to no good, no technique is going to help. It's got to start with an attitude. So what I try to help them understand, and this is a lesson I learned years ago in dealing with a special needs son, and I did a whole TED talk about it, but the idea of getting to a point where you believe the other person is just trying to do the best they can with the resources they have. I call it the law of positive intent, is even if you vehemently disagree with the other person, whether it's left versus right in politics or whether it's 2 very different ideas of how to grow a business from 2 different people on the leadership team, if I can get each of the leaders to truly believe that that other leader is not waking up in the morning saying, what can I screw up today? That they're waking up in the morning with the same goals. They're just trying to build the business, just trying to do the right thing with the resources they have. Instead of getting angry, if you and I totally disagree, if I believe you're trying to do the right thing with the resources you have, instead of me getting angry at you, what it causes me to do is get curious and say, wait a minute. If Owen's just trying to do the right thing, but he disagrees with me, he must have some information that I don't have, or he must have some resources that I don't have. So the most beneficial thing, the most productive thing for me to do is to ask him questions, not as an interrogation, but to ask him questions out of true intellectual curiosity, to say, "Hell, I know you disagree with me. Help me understand, what am I missing?" And if they can do that, they may or may not agree. At the end of the day, a decision's got to get made in business, and they may never agree, and that's okay. But they could at least have a productive civil conversation if they believe they're both coming from a good place. So that's the thing I've got to, once they do that, they can have a great conversation, agree or not. But if they can't buy that the other person is coming from a world of they're just trying to do the right thing, then they're just going to clash and not get anywhere.
What if you're not coming from the right place? So I agree with you. I think that's a great approach. And I think that going in with the right mindset, regardless of whether or not it's true, helps you to be able to ask the right questions and dig in. That makes sense. The question I have is, in the event where the person, let's say, in the situation wants to get what they want.
Yeah.
Doesn't give a shit about what you want or what anybody else wants. They want to steamroll you. From that perspective, given the fact that their intention is not positive, the danger with, let's say, saying, I believe that this person has a positive intention, might lead you to be, for example, blindsided because you, to a degree, trust them, because you're choosing to trust them, because you're choosing to believe that they have a positive intent. And as a result of that, you can easily get screwed over. I mean, in a negotiation, for example, if one party goes in good faith and the other party doesn't, the other party that doesn't has the advantage. It's like that whole, the old prisoner's dilemma. It's like, if we both say, that we're innocent, then we get off. But if one of us says that the other person is guilty and we're not guilty, then depending on who it does, if both of us say we're guilty, we get put in prison. If one says the other person's guilty and the other one says we're innocent, then that person who says we're innocent loses. So it's like that kind of thing.
See, but I think that there's a couple of, it's a great question. A couple of answers to it. One is, I think or let me not say I think, there is a difference between believing in someone's positive intention and trusting that they're going to do the right thing, right? I'm not saying always trust the other person's going to do the right thing, because you might get run over, you might lose in a negotiation. Believing in the positive intent of someone else doesn't mean that you may still argue pretty vehemently for your way. It just means you're going to get curious about how they're thinking. So I think, number one, don't mistake believing in positive intent to trusting and being run over by somebody. That's not the case. But maybe just as importantly or more importantly is I look at the opposite. Okay, what if I believe if someone disagrees with me, I believe they are intentionally trying to do the wrong thing or intentionally trying to screw me over? I don't know where can the conversation go other than me walking away or just going to battle with you on it, where nobody wins, where even if your intentions are not as pure as I might ideally believe they are. If I go at it from the standpoint of believing you're trying to do the best you can with the resources you have, I'm going to get curious and ask questions. That's still a better way to go. I still think we're going to wind up in a better place. Believing someone wakes up in the morning and says, how can I screw things up today? I don't think that's ever going to end in a good place, where if you believe the other person's just trying to do the best they can, I think there's at least a chance that you could end up in a good place.
I think it's not necessarily either or, though, right? It's not like I'm either going to go, this person is positive intent, they're just doing the best they can, or this person, despises everyone and wants to screw me over as much as. I think there's the middle ground there. But at the same time, I agree with you. In many ways, it reminds me of the notion of the fact that, like, if you think about any villains, no villain turns around and sees themselves as the villain, right? Lex Luthor doesn't see himself as a bad guy. Darth Vader didn't even. Darth Vader just thought, look, all I'm trying to do,
those weren't real people, right? It's just,
look,
they were reading a script.
I'm just telling you, all I'm trying to do is bring order to the universe. That's all he wanted to do. And all these people like Luke Skywalker screwed him over on it, but he was just trying to bring order to the universe. The point is, Darth Vader didn't even see himself as an inverted commas bad guy. It was like, of course he's going to use the dark side. The dark side could have helped him to save Padme. My point is I'm not going to go too much into this, but my point is that so often we tell ourselves a story, and that story makes us look as if we've got the positive intention regardless. So in many ways, that's what we're doing to ourselves. Let me ask you, on the same kind of area, but a little bit closer to home, what happens when you have two people that disagree in families, right? Now, I've been blessed. My parents have a very close relationship with them. I've not had a situation where I haven't talked to a family member or have had huge fights, right? But there's an awful lot of people out there that will have strong fights with their loved ones, that will go home for Thanksgiving or for Christmas or whatever, or for any of the holidays, regardless of what religion they are or aren't. And during that time, it'll be very difficult for them because there's all of these anchors that have been set up, these triggers that have been set up over time. When you have a situation where there's a fundamental, let's imagine it could even be political because we're in the States. So it could be like you have a son or daughter that's very Republican or very liberal and their parent is the opposite. How do you heal that? How do you heal the rift between, family members that are very close? Because there's an awful lot of emotional, it's nuclear compared to, the business world.
I mean, I've got a great example of that in my own life. I mean, the best example of that from my own life is me and my son. And it took years. I mean, this idea of believing in the positive intent of others, that's not something I've believed my whole life. That's something that it's more recent times that's something I have started to understand that while to your point, it's not always true. I know not everybody is always, there are some people that are trying to do some things that benefit them and nobody else. But it took me a long time to realize that that philosophy is something that does way more good in my life than bad. And so my son, who's now, God, he's about to turn 30. By the time this comes out, maybe he's 30 years old. For the first 12 years of his life, we had a horrible relationship. And it wasn't, obviously when he was 5, 6, 7, 8, 12 years old, it wasn't about left versus right in politics. It was about the fact that he grew up with some issues. He has, Asperger's syndrome. It took us a while to get that diagnosed. But he was not who I dreamt of. I mean, as horrible as it sounds, when I thought of being a dad, I thought of being in the backyard having a catch with my son. I thought of, all the things you kind of envision, and he was not that way. He had struggles, and he was not into sports, and getting him to do anything that a quote unquote normal kid, and that sounds horrible saying normal, but the average kid would do, was not who he was.
So what is Asperger's syndrome, just for anyone out there?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. So Asperger's is, and it's not even a formal diagnosis anymore. It used to be, but it's on the autism spectrum. So, when you think of autism, most people think, if you know the movie, Rain Man, it may be someone who's not nonverbal, or they repeat the same things over and over again. That's kind of a low functioning part of the spectrum. And then there's the high functioning part of the spectrum, which used to be called Asperger's. And it's basically where socially the things that you and I and most kids may automatically learn did not come easy. Very socially awkward. Things overwhelmed him where he would, kids or even adults with Asperger's typically they hyper focus on a few things, and they may know the train schedule across the country. Like that crazy level of they know these details, but they don't know how to tie their shoelace, or they don't know how to have a conversation with someone. My son has a memory that you wouldn't believe. When he was a kid, he was really, really good at math, but just didn't get the social cues. And certain textures freaked him out. Like when he was 2 years old, he wouldn't walk on the grass in bare feet. Like that freaked him out. Certain foods he wouldn't eat. Everything was just way harder. Now, I, as a parent, and again, I look back and I'm like, man, I was a pretty crappy parent back then, because the way I thought of it was he was making everything harder on me. I'm his dad. Like, I ought to be focused on making things less hard on him, but because he was so different, and because Asperger's is not like, it's not like he had Down syndrome, or he had cerebral palsy, or he had something that, well, you can look, oh my God, there's something wrong. Like I have to have different expectations.
On the outside, it doesn't look like there's anything.
No, and even on the inside, like there were days or hours within days where he would act like any other kid. And then there were times where it was like, why can't he just go take a shower? Why can't he just come up for dinner? Why can't he, do his schoolwork? Why won't he, play Little League baseball like the other, and it was just very frustrating, because there were, to look at him sometimes you'd say, he can do that. And literally my thought was, he just knows what buttons to push to piss me off. And it would cause my level of, and I wasn't from the time I was a kid, I had no patience. I was a kid who'd buy a model airplane and I couldn't get it to fit right. And I just break it and throw it on the floor. Like, I didn't have a lot of patience, and I didn't have the patience for him. So we spent years where we just couldn't communicate with each other, and years where he would do things and I would say horrible things to him that I'd regret later. And by the way, part of it was when he was at that age where things were toughest.
How old was he?
We knew something was wrong from the time he was about a year and a half.
Right.
When all of a sudden he lost words instead of gaining words. And it just like we knew something was going on. And it was tough because he wasn't diagnosed. We just knew something was wrong. So, but from that time of being like a year, 2 years old, up through him being about 12, is the later part of those years were my worst years from a business and career standpoint. I went from a career where I had a job and I was getting paid and just going my way to starting my own business. And that was a crazy struggle for a while and put my family through financial hell for a number of years. And that was the same time that all of these issues started happening with my son, with Richie. And I just had no patience for it and would yell and scream. And of course, that wasn't going to do anything. So, back to your question of how do you heal these things, it's right around when he was 12 years old, I had learned some things from a coach that knew the right questions to ask me. Learned that on my good weeks, if I was having a good week at work or my good days, interestingly enough, he would have really good days. And on my bad days, he was a horror. Holy crap, was it him or was it me? Mm-hmm. And I learned all that. And that's when I started learning about this idea of believing in positive intent. It started with my son. He's not trying to push my buttons and be a pain in the ass by not coming up for dinner or not taking a shower or not wanting to go to school or not doing his homework. That wasn't him trying to piss me off and waking up in the morning and saying, what can I do to piss off my dad today? Like I learned, man, this kid is trying to do the best he can with the resources he has. I'll never truly understand what's going through his head. I don't have Asperger's. I'm not seeing the world the way he's seeing it. The world was so overwhelming to him that sometimes his only escape was to hyperfocus on a TV show or a video game and screw the world. The world's too overwhelming. I'm going to hyperfocus on this. And when I started learning that that's what's going on and that he's trying to do the best he can, he's just having a tough time, all of a sudden I went from, how do I get him to do what I want? How do I get this pain in the neck kid to do the right thing? I went to, man, how could I help him? How could I be a good dad for him? And it took me years. It took me years not only to learn how to be a better dad, but to heal the stuff that, frankly, the stuff I put him through, that, he's about to turn 30 and the fear in my head is some of the shit I put in his head 25 years ago is still impacting him.
If you were to talk to him and say to him something about the past, how you feel about the past, I mean, have you had that conversation?
The positive part of all this is because of the work I've done on myself and with him. And frankly, I think I'm not a religious person, but I'm a spiritual person. I do believe that there's some energy in the universe we don't totally understand. And there are things that happen to us for a reason to teach us things. I believe I became a coach because it challenges me to learn and grow as a person so I can better help my son. And by the way, I have a daughter that's really important to me too, but thankfully she was a lot easier. I also believe that the universe gave me a son that has these kinds of challenges because it challenged me to be a better person. Like I said, I've never had a lot of patience, and now I have a lot more patience than I did. But interestingly enough, so I did a TED Talk about all of this a couple years ago. And as I was writing the TED Talk, and frankly, my first book was a business book, but it was told in the form of a story, and it was about a dad with a son with Asperger's and how he learns things from his son with Asperger's that help him build his business. Yeah. And that's true. So a number of years ago, I had him read my book, and then I was writing my TED Talk. And the first half of the TED Talk is about my anger about the situation. And the last half is about how what I've learned helped me turn things around. Because by the way, my son and I are great friends right now. We have an amazing relationship.
But when you say the first part of the TED Talk, that was you, as you were describing it to us, it was the anger you were going through because why isn't he this? Why isn't he that? Okay.
Yeah. So I actually, when I was writing the script for the TED Talk between a year and a half or 2 years ago, I did the TED Talk about a year and a half ago. I'm writing the script and it's making me kind of emotional because it's kind of causing me to rethink all these things and that happened years ago, and emotional from a positive standpoint about where our relationship is now. But I called my son down to my office and I debated doing this, but I said, Rich, I'm writing a speech and I want you to read it.
Oh God. Okay.
And I frankly was not sure if this was a big mistake.
I'm nervous just listening to this.
So I'm like, I want you to read this thing. And he reads it. Well, he got about a third of the way through.
The first third where you're angry.
Yeah. And he stops reading and he looks at me and he says, yeah. And I'm getting emotional, but he wasn't emotional. My son doesn't get he does, but he wasn't emotional. And he said, yeah, I was a real asshole back then. And I said, Rich, wait till you get to the end of the speech. It turns out I was the asshole. And he read the whole speech and we hugged afterward. And it was beautiful because I don't hide from him that I believe I screwed up back then. And he still has his issues and he's about to turn 30. He's still living at home. He may always live with us. I mean, he's got a job now. He's doing great. He's putting money away. I'm so freaking proud of him, but he still has his issues and living on his own would be a struggle. I think at some point he will, but he's still living with us. But his both of our ability now to look back at what happened, and he knows that he was a handful. But it's important for him also to know from me that I was a handful too. Sure. And we were both to blame. And I take more of the blame than he does. But it's taken us a long time to heal from that. And man, I can't imagine having a better relationship with him now.
How do you want, like, let's say in many, many years from now, when you pass away, how do you want him to describe you? First
off, I'm not passing away. Okay. I'm going to figure out how do I want him to describe me? That's a great question. First, most importantly, I want him to describe me as a friend. As a friend. He is, and that's important to me for two reasons. Number one, the obvious reason is, especially given the relationship we had way back, which was very, very far from that when I was yelling and screaming and getting crazy with him. So there's the obvious reason, but because of who he is and the challenges he still has, he doesn't have a lot of friends. Mm-hmm. And I'm probably his best friend right now. And part of that makes me proud and happy. And part of that makes me sad because I want him to have others that he's close with. So when I say I want him to say I was a great friend, it's not only for the obvious reasons, but he needs a great friend because of the challenges he's got. So that's more important than anything is I want him to believe I'm someone he can talk to and have fun with. And, there are TV shows that if I watch it without him, he will kill me. We have to watch it together. Mm-hmm. We just went to go see a movie together last night.
What'd you go see?
We went to see
Wolverine.
Deadpool and Wolverine, which he thought was amazing. I thought it was good. He thought it was amazing. Yeah. But number one, I want him to what I want him to say about me is I was a great friend. I also want to be, and this is a tougher one because he doesn't have a lot of confidence in who he could become, which pains me. Mm-hmm. He drives a truck and delivers food, and he's doing great, and he's putting money away. And man, I didn't think he'd keep a job for 6 days when he was younger. I'm like, how's this guy going to keep a job? And he's had this job for 7 years. So I'm super proud of him. But I also want to be an example of, if you work hard and believe in yourself, what you can become. I think he can do more and he can become more. And I hope I've got a lot of years to keep being an example for him. So I want to be an example of not only I want to be an example of what you could become in life, but the fact that I friggin' love what I do every single day. And I want to be an example that he can continue to kind of one day find something he loves where it's not just a job or a career and he's making money. But I want to be an example for both my kids of loving what you want to do, loving what you do, being able to be successful at it, but also loving it. I mean, we spend so many hours at work. To think of it as just a job and one day we'll retire. For me, it's more than that. And I'd love to be an example for my kids of that.
Do you think they're both proud of you?
Yeah, I think they are. I think they are both very different. Neither of my kids believe their careers is all that important. They believe it's a means to an end. My daughter, who's doing great, she's 28 years old. She's living down in Maryland. She's such an amazing kid, biggest heart I've ever seen in a human being. I don't know how she came from me. I don't think my heart is as big as hers. But just super smart, works her ass off. But work is just kind of a way of her living the lifestyle that she wants to live. It's not, for me, my work has always been more important than that. And I'm not even saying that's a good thing. Like when I was younger, when I was 23, 24, 25 years old, I was a management consultant working for a big consulting firm. My attitude was, you could beat me, whip me, kick me, work me 24 hours a day. I'm making partner in this place. And I want the big house and the nice car and that's who I was. I don't think that was a very balanced way of looking at my life. When I look at, and I'll talk about my daughter now, not my son. When I look at my daughter, I'm super proud of her. And I also look at her and a lot of her generation as, they're so much different than I was. I think she has a much more holistic way to look at her life, which I think is very healthy. I also think there's nothing wrong with kind of building a career and working hard towards something. And that's such a big part of who I am. It's not a big part of who she is. It's not a big part of who my son is. So do I think they're proud of me? I think they are. I think I've, provided for my family and done a lot of great things, and we travel together. I also think my daughter it wouldn't surprise me if she looked and said, I wish he didn't work as hard. Like, why does he think his career and his business is so important? He travels, he's working all the time. He should probably relax a little bit.
Speaking of which, what drives you? Or what drives you? You talked about passion in your work. Why do you do what you do?
What drives me is, it's really a combination of two things. But the main thing that drives me is freedom. And let me talk about what that means, because we may have very different definitions of what that is. But freedom to me is having the freedom to make the choices I want to make. So let's talk about money. To me, thankfully, I have built, after many years of struggle, I built a lucrative business. I want to build it much bigger, but I built a lucrative business. Building a business that brings in a lot of revenue and profit, for me, is not about being able to say, I've got a business that's this big, or it's not about the pride that I've built a business that big. having a business that's lucrative is important for me because it gives me the freedom to make choices that I want to make. It gives me the freedom to travel more if I want to travel. It gives me the freedom to have my wife, not have, like, makes it sound like it's me, gives me the freedom to allow my wife to make decisions on what she wants to do. She was working a job for many years. Thank God she had a real job as I was trying to build my business, because if she didn't have a real job, making decent money, she had a very, nice career, we would have lost our house, 15 years ago. I would have not been able to pay the mortgage. We would have lost the house. But freedom to me means now she's got the ability, as she did, to say, I'm done. I've retired from the corporate career and I'm going to go get a 3 different health coaching certification and build that business and do different things. To me, building my business big is about having the freedom to do the things I want to do. And thankfully, it's given me a lot of that freedom and the freedom to build my business now bigger if I want, or keep it where it is. So part of what drives me is freedom. And part of what drives me is the idea that, and this is a little bit more what drives me in working with my clients, but that's important. Such a big part of my life is doing what I do with clients. For me personally, it's about freedom. Working with my clients, it's about helping the companies I work with create fulfilling environments where the people that go to work there every day could feel great about what they do. Where they're not just, I've seen so many people, starting with my grandfather, and we can dig into that if you want to dig into it. But I learned a lesson from my grandfather that retirement is not always a beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. And there's so many people that I know, that I'm sure you know, that work at a job or even work at a business, if they're entrepreneurs, work at a job in our business and a business, and their major goal in life is to hit 65 and retire. That to me, there's nothing wrong with, so I don't want to put anybody down if they want to hit 65 and retire. But to me, why would I want to spend 45 years of my life doing something that doesn't fulfill me, so that at some magical age I can stop doing it and travel the world?
I want to challenge you on that,
Mike,
because look, if you ask me, and you know me at this stage, I've worked for myself since as long as I can remember. When I first left college, even when I was in college, I started. So I started the business when I was 17 as a therapist initially, and then you know the story. 30 years on, if you ask me about retirement, my thoughts are, I never, ever, ever want to retire. It's literally the worst thing I can possibly imagine doing. I want to die on stage, or I want to die when I'm in the middle of my book, preferably not in the next few weeks. But, over the course of my life, I don't want to retire, because for me, I've set up my life in such a way that I'm lucky and blessed that I can do the kinds of things. I've traveled to over 100 countries. I've done all the things I wanted to do. The reason I bring it up is I get you when you talk about retirement. However, the overwhelming majority of people that I know don't love their jobs and aren't necessarily in the position that we're in. Like, it's very easy for us in the personal development or coaching world to turn around and go on social media and go, hey, do you want to be a coach? Do you want to do this? And position it like this beautiful, look at Tony Robbins getting thousands of people on it. You can be like Tony too. All you have to do is follow the formula. And to me, there's this sort of notion, which is, it's obviously going to be more here because we live in the land of opportunity over in the States. But there's this notion that, it's almost like being a solopreneur, being an entrepreneur, working for yourself, that's the pinnacle. And all those people in 9-to-5 jobs who might be doing everything from garbage collection to, working in a business that isn't that interesting for them. It's a job. And at the end of the job, they look forward. I know back home, I know a lot of people, an awful lot of people I would know, They look forward to their pints at the end of the day or their pint at the end of the week. They look forward to triathlons or, duathlons or whatever they do, or Ironman. Like they have something to look forward to. The football that's on the weekend, they go every week to watch the GAA game, or if it's in, the football game or whatever it is. And that's their life. And they have that stuff to look forward to. And they go for 2 holidays a year. And for them, the idea is, I don't particularly enjoy my job. I don't hate it, but I got to put a roof over my head. I don't have the opportunity to be able to just listen to this advice of this guru and that guru and go, right, I'm going to become a self-employed whatever, and I'm going to do it. Maybe they don't even have the ambition to be self-employed. Maybe they don't have the skill to be self-employed. So for all of those people, they can't wait to retire because at 60 or 65 or whenever it is that they do, it means that they no longer have to do that, and maybe they can spend time. Now, I would agree with you in the sense that if ever you want to be able to spend the time that you want to spend, it's when you're younger that you can actually do something with it, right? But I just wanted to check in on your perspective on that, because I think it's easy for us to say it, me and you. You've built up your business over 35 years. You're doing brilliantly. I'm very proud of you as a friend. I'm doing very well for myself as well. We're lucky in that sense. And part of it is skill and intelligence and whatnot. A big part of it's luck, and a big part of it's circumstances and a bunch of other stuff. So I just wanted to throw that out because I think it's very easy to fall into the trap that a lot of people do, which is like, retirement is for people who hate their job, and you shouldn't hate. You should find what you're passionate about. It would be great if you can, but not everyone's in that space.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. And this is what drives me, right? I'm not going to put this at retirement's an evil thing. Don't retire. But for me, here's where it kind of got implanted in my head. So my grandfather was, when I was young, he was the best man I ever knew. I grew up in the Bronx in an apartment building, and we lived on the 6th floor. My grandparents lived on the 5th. So we saw them every day. We had dinner together, everything. And my grandfather, blue collar guy, never made a lot of money, but he always worked, blue collar guy. And he was so proud of his family. Like his eyes would fill up whenever he talked about his family. And he was kind of this rough exterior, like he was a tough guy, but all mushy and all heart on the inside once you got to know him. But he was like the strong, and I don't mean physical strength, although he was pretty strong, not fit, but he was like the strongest man I knew. Like you can't screw with Pop. Like don't screw with Pop. And so he was kind of my idol growing up. Now he always had a job. He was driving a cab until he was, I think it was 83 years old. Now, he had no business driving a cab. He couldn't see very well, got into a few accidents, and he gets fired one day from the cab company.
How old was he?
He was 83 or 84. I think he was 83. Like I said, no business driving a cab. But he was very...
Sorry, what did you say? You're fired. Yeah. Sorry, what did you say?
And he, and his whole life, like he drove a truck delivery. It was all blue collar stuff. And for the last, I think 10 years of his life, he was driving this cab, and he was very unceremoniously fired. They were real pricks about it. But I wouldn't want to gotten in his cab at that point. But anyway, so he was a guy that always had this gleam in his eye, this fire in his belly, strongest guy I knew. And he gets fired that day. And he didn't even tell us. My grandmother told us, like he didn't have it was tough for him to say, because it was important for him to be useful. And after dinner, we'd always have dinner together. We'd watch the Yankee game on TV. We'd do something, and he had the chair he'd sit in and whatever. And all of a sudden, the gleam went out of his eye. The fire went out of his belly, and he'd just sit there, and he wasn't Pop anymore. And like I remember saying, that the TV would be on. I knew he was starting to get hard of hearing, and I'd say, "Pop, could you hear the TV?" And he'd go, "Nah, but don't worry about it." Like he was just waiting around to die.
He checked out.
Yeah, and he lived 2 more years. But there was no life in those. He wasn't Pop anymore. And what that imprinted for me, right or wrong, good or bad, doesn't matter. What it imprinted in my brain is that for him, once he was forced to retire, his whole life was about looking back. There was nothing to look forward to. And he didn't feel useful anymore. And he was just waiting around to die. And he grew up on the intersection of Christie and Hester Street in Lower Manhattan, which now I think is probably part of Chinatown. But back when he was a kid, it was low. The Lower East Side. It was all Jews and Italians. And I actually have in my office behind me, if you're ever on a Zoom call or see one of my podcasts, there's the Hester Street sign behind, and it's to remind me of him. And it just implanted in my brain that I want to keep being useful. I want my peak to be ahead of me. I'm 59 years old, and I still feel like I'm gonna keep growing. I hope when I'm 75 years old, I'm looking forward to, by the time I'm 80, I want to do this, and that's just me. That's what drives me. Now, the way I think about that with the companies I work with is not that nobody should ever retire. It's not that everybody always has to love their job. You're right. I get that. But what it drives for me is because I think in my mind of retirement as a dirty word, because once my grandfather retired, it was like the life was gone in him. And I don't want that to happen for me. And my work is so important to me that if I stopped today, I'd be like, what am I going to do? If I won the lottery, if I won $500 million today, I would do the same thing tomorrow that I plan to do tomorrow. And I don't put that on everybody. Some people would say, I'm going to quit this damn job and go. That's beautiful. But what it imprinted that in me. So when I think of the companies I work with, I want to help them create environments where people feel great about what they're doing, where people want to go to work every day. They still may choose to retire, but I want to help my clients create environments where people don't spend every day just looking forward to retirement. That's their major goal. I want them to feel good about what they're doing now as well. And you don't have to have your own business. You don't have to be an entrepreneur. You could work from 9 to 5, but still work in an environment where you love what you do every day.
I think there's an extra piece, an extra lesson or learning from what you're saying. And that is the notion that it's not just about, whether you retire or don't retire. It's that when you retire, it's about what can you do to be able to make that more fulfilling. So what can you do to be able to have stuff to look forward to? What can you do to find meaning in your retirement? Because the real problem with your grandpa was he lost his meaning in that situation.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the key, is that when you're looking ahead at your future, if you're planning to retire, it's not just a case of, okay, I'm going to go to retire. You have to have that meaning. You have to still feel useful and meaningful. And not everyone, by the way, not everyone needs to feel useful.
And you could lose meaning before you retire.
Yeah.
Well, I was talking to you earlier. There's a band that I used to love from the 80s called Squeeze. And I saw them play at Bergen Performing Arts Center, which is a semi-small place in northern New Jersey. And this is a place, this is a band that used to play big, like Madison Square Garden. They used to play big places. They peaked 30 years ago. I saw them 5 years ago. They looked friggin' miserable. Mm-hmm. They looked like they didn't want to be on stage. And I looked and I thought, imagine peaking that early in your life, and the rest of your life is just kind of an echo of stuff you did. Now, they're not retired, and I may be putting too much on them that, I'm just, what I saw was they looked miserable. I couldn't wait for them to get off stage because they looked like they couldn't wait to get off stage. And I just looked and I'm like, I can't imagine if my best years were 30 years ago. And so I want to have a life where I keep my best years ahead of me. And you ask what drives me. That's part of what drives me.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask you was about growing older, right? You're 60 years old, right?
59.
59, yeah. So pretty much 60. So as someone who is 59, one of the things that I've noticed for myself is that I'm training for the marathon at the moment. The difference between me training when I was in my early 20s versus now is quite significant, and it's significant physically and it's significant mentally. Now, obviously, I can't remember back perfectly to 25 years ago when I did my first marathon, right? But I want to ask you, because there's also your beliefs about yourself. So you know me, I'm into the whole area of belief. So therefore, I've looked at Ellen Langer's work about your beliefs affect your age and the whole biological age thing and whatnot. And you got a lot of people online that are all like, oh, look, I'm 50 years old and I drink kale all the time and I have this kind of supplement and look at me. And I feel like I do when I'm 20. And I'm not saying they're lying at all. But then on the flip side, you have people turning around saying, growing old is a nightmare. Soon as you get over 40, your body starts falling apart. You get aches and pains. You got this disc and that disc and the other disc, and your hip goes out of joint and you get sick easy. And so you got two, let's say, hypnotic suggestions. One is you're perfect and you should be just as healthy as you are at 20, 30 or whatever. Then on the flip side, you got the other ones who's the tormentors of doom saying, listen, your body's going to break apart until finally you're in your 70s and 80s if you've tortured yourself that long, and then eventually you're gone. I don't like either of those. And the obvious one I don't like is the second one. The first one, though, I'm also not a big fan of, because while I agree that it's great to have the right mindset, the right attitude about our age, I also think there's a little bit of this Pollyanna head in the clouds. Yes, if you believe that you're only 20, you'll only be acting 20. You'll only feel 20. You'll only have, your body will respond. I'm like, all right, hyperbole. Take a seat, relax, eat some popcorn, chill out, and let's get on with the real world. So from that perspective, with that nice little setup, how do you see growing old? Like, how do you feel about the fact, and you said earlier you kind of don't feel as old as you actually are, but how do you feel about growing older and getting closer to death?
I didn't hear a word you said because my hearing aid battery is dying. I don't look at it as like about to turn 60 is kind of like a big thing. And I have a friend that just turned 50 and he's freaking out about it. My son is about to turn 30 and he's like, oh, don't talk to me about turning 30. I'm not looking at this as some negative thing. Like, yeah, my body's not what it was 25 years ago. My body wasn't that great 25 years ago. Am I taking some more, prescription pills that I was back then? Sure, because I'm not listening to my health coach wife about what to eat. So yeah, I mean, I'm not, I'm in the best shape of my life. No, that's BS. I'm getting older and I can't do some of the things I used to do. But I think the reason why the age doesn't scare me or depress me or any of those things, and it goes back to what I was saying a little earlier, is from a life standpoint, not my body or not specific things, from a life standpoint, I still feel like I haven't peaked. Like my wife and I are traveling. Like, we just, we went to Scotland and we've got our next trip planned to New Zealand and we're already planning our trip to Iceland. And from a business standpoint, I'm writing my new book and I'm developing software and I'm trying to do more keynote speaking. And there's so much ahead of me that I'm still looking forward to stuff. So I think, the way, and maybe the reason why I still feel really good, whether I'm 59 or I hope I feel the same way at 69, is not because I feel like I'm the picture of health and I feel great, but it's because I feel like there's a lot of people, as you start getting older, start looking back more than they look forward. They're looking back at what their life was, and I'll never have that again, or I'll never have that again, and I'm not doing that. Yeah, I look back and in some cases look back at anger at what a jerk I was. And in some case look back at pride that I was able to work through a business that wasn't working at first and build it into something over many years. But I have so much more to look forward to that that I feel really positive about where I am and where I'm going. I don't feel like, oh my God, I'm getting old. Things are going to start breaking down. No, I'm getting old and there's a lot more I want to do that I'm going to go do.
Just to keep it on the positive, what about death? Like, the fact is, you're going to die. We're all going to die. How do you feel or think about, and I'm asking this from a serious perspective. I'll tell you why.
I get it.
It's because I really like the whole stoicism thing and memento mori and the whole thing of you're going to die as a reminder to us that we must look at the life that we have currently and make the most of in whatever way that makes sense for us. But I think, again, something that I kind of rebel against is this notion that we just be positive, like just plaster everything off, avoid any kind of topics that might be in any way uncomfortable for people, and just be super positive. The bottom line is, I think some of the most beautiful pieces of art, and by pieces of art I mean movies or books written or anything, are the ones that make us feel so impacted, and that has the darkness and the light in it. And when I say death, how do you deal with, like, how do you feel about death? How do you feel about, like, grief, right? You've gone through, I'm sure, situations of grief where you've lost people. Like, how do you philosophize around the fact that one day you're not going to be here anymore? I'm not going to be here anymore.
First, I will tell you, I know when I'm going to die because my son and I have a deal together. So Angela and I, my wife and I, went to a barbecue about 10 years ago. And one of our friends' grandmother was still alive, was 96 years old. She had no quality of life. It was just horrible. And she was more of a burden on her family. So I got home that day and I said to my son, I said, and it was probably longer. I was probably maybe 45. So it was like 15 years ago. And I said, Rich, do me a favor. I said, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to live to a point that I'm just existing and causing you kids stress. So here's the deal. When I turn 70, kill me. I said, don't let me know it's coming. And he's such a wise ass that he's probably going to wait until the last day of my 70th year just so I'm freaking out every single day. So first off, there's that. But the honest
and
answer,
I bet you he remembers it because of his memory.
So I thought now. So when I said to him 70, I said, Richie, one day I'm sure I will come to you as I get older and say, Rich, remember I said 70? Make it 75. And I want you to look me in the eye and go, okay, Dad. So I have friends over, and I swore, it's just years later. This is like 5 years ago. And I swore, I thought I told him 75. So I'm telling friends, and Richie's in the room, and I said, and by the way, I told him when I hit 75. He said, Dad, it was 70. And I said, Rich, no, I know I told you 75. And he looked at me and went, okay, Dad. I'm like, oh, man. So now I think my plan is to kill him when I'm 69 is my only way.
Sure.
But, it's a hard question for me to answer about death because I haven't been one. Of course, I've had people in my life pass away. I loved my father-in-law, and he passed, it's probably almost 20 years now that he passed. My dad passed 2.5 years ago. My mom just passed this last October. And of course, all of that was hard on me, but I looked at, I have an older brother who's about 4 years older than I am. And he was always kind of growing up, he was like, don't you have any emotions? Like he never was emotional about anything. And he took those deaths harder than I did. When my grandfather passed away, he took it much harder than I did. And I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm just so damn self-centered that life is all about me anyway. I really don't know what it is, but I find that I have dealt with death. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about my own death and fearing that. One day it's going to happen, and I hope it happens quick and I'm doing something I love, but I don't fear it. I don't think about it. interestingly enough, when my mom passed, which is the most recent, I didn't cry when I was in the hospital when she passed. I didn't cry when she passed. I cried when I told people I loved that she passed. When I had to call my wife and tell her she wasn't at the hospital with us. When I got home and told my son, I totally broke down. When I had to call my daughter, totally broke down. But was I thought grieved in a healthy way, but it's interesting as I think about it. My mom passed, and I had a lot of travel to do right after. I had a keynote speech I was doing. I had a bunch of clients I traveled for. I had a bunch going on. So, we had our ceremony, and in the Jewish religion, you sit Shiva, which I think I'm not a religious person, but I think that's one of the things the Jews get right is the way they do death, and sitting Shiva where we did 3 days at my brother's house where people came over and brought food, and we told stories about my mom and laughed. But I didn't have much time after that. I went right into travel and work and stuff I had to do. And then the interesting thing is where I thought I was dealing with it well, I had some things that had not gone great from a business standpoint as well. And all of a sudden, when I kind of stopped moving from the stuff I did after my mother's death on the business side, I remember describing it to my coach where I felt like I had a layer of shit around me about an inch thick. Like I just felt like I was covered in I don't know what, and it was just like I just wasn't thinking right. I wasn't feeling right. And I didn't know what to do about it. And I'd never felt that way before. And when my dad died, I didn't feel that way. I dealt with it okay, and I kind of moved on. So I wasn't even necessarily thinking, oh, it's because my mom died, because I had dealt with others before and didn't feel that way. And I remember a couple weeks later, and I was feeling really bad. My wife went on a retreat, a yoga retreat with some friends of hers. So I had a bachelor long weekend. And I decided to go back to, I don't live too far from my old neighborhood where I grew up. I live in New Jersey. I grew up in the Bronx. And I went back to my old neighborhood because I had like nothing to do for a day. And I drove around where I went to school, where I played stickball, where my father had his luncheonette, his store when we were kids, walked around all these places, and, where me and my buddies would sit on a wall in front of a private school and get drunk and get chased out of the neighborhood. Went by all those places, and it was almost as if I was grieving both my parents. Maybe I didn't grieve for my father the way I should have, and it didn't impact me until my mother died. But going back, I was kind of reminiscing in a positive way. And I guess as I'm saying this, it's helping me realize that for me, grieving was not sitting and crying my eyes out until I couldn't cry anymore. For me, my family life was always a very positive thing. I, loved my parents to death. We never had a lot of money growing up. It wasn't about money. We struggled money-wise, but we always had fun, and we always laughed. And me and my brother my son loves to be with me and my brother because we tell stories from when we were kids and all the crazy stuff we did. And going back to the old neighborhood and actually feeling good and reminiscing about all the great times we had together and playing basketball in the park across the street from my house and all the stuff we did. By the time that day was done, and there were no tears that day, it was all smiles and reminiscing. All of a sudden, that 1-inch layer of crap that I felt around my whole body was gone.
The reason I'm asking you this is because if I think about my life, I'm not scared of much. I'm quite confident. I'm quite secure in myself. I've worked a lot on myself. But the thing that petrifies me more than anything I can imagine is anything happening to my parents, right? I'm very close. What is it that you say to yourself inside your head that helps you to cope?
Man, I wish I knew. I wish I had the magic. Oh, here's what I say and it makes me feel okay. I think, because I don't know if it's something I say or something I think. You know, I wonder if it's just an accumulation over the years and just the way I think about my own life. I don't know. I think I'm probably rambling, but I'm not sure what I say. I mean, that I certainly think of them, and I think of them a lot. And there are times where, you know, I used to, especially after my dad passed, I talked to my mother every day. Not because we had anything to say to each other. There wasn't that much of an update. But my mother was kind of the typical Jewish mother who was always worried about something. And I think she wanted to talk to me every day. It was more like, oh, let's just check in and make sure we're both alive. I mean, the conversations were literally sometimes 60 seconds. How you doing? Good, good. And they go, okay, good, good. All right, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And there are times where I'll be in my car driving, and my mother passed now. It's about 8-9 months ago. And there's still times I'm in my car and I'm like, oh, I haven't called mom. I've got to call mom, or something good will happen. And I'm like, oh, I've got to call my mother. And it makes me smile. It happens, but it makes me smile. It doesn't make me down. It doesn't make me sad. I feel like they gave me everything they can give me while they were alive, and I did the same for them. I don't feel like there were any words left unsaid or any deeds left undone. I just feel like it's okay. Like I could still go on and live my life, and I have the support of you know, friends and family around me. I don't know. I don't think it's anything in particular that I think. Maybe it goes back to feeling really good about the relationship I have with them while they were alive. Because I think if I didn't say I love you, if I didn't show them that, maybe I'd feel worse and like, oh my God, they're not here and I need to do these things. But I think we had a great relationship while they were here, which maybe makes it easier for me to say goodbye.
But the one thing that bothers me in particular over here, and I want to hear your perspective on it, is this notion of boundaries. I want to talk to you about this. You get an idea that hits in the personal development world, right? So for example, let's take trauma. Trauma is a big word. Now, is there such thing as trauma? Absolutely. Are people severely affected by trauma? Absolutely. Is there a situation where culturally the word trauma has been, again, taken over and hijacked to the perspective where I'm traumatized because you stopped me playing my video game? I'm traumatized because you put, now, to be fair, if I go into McDonald's and I order a plain burger with just the bread and the meat, and they put a tomato on it or tomato on it, that's traumatic.
I'm with you. I take tomatoes off of all sandwiches.
Yes, correct.
You too?
I don't even want them
no
on my sandwich.
No wonder we're friends.
I don't even want them on my sandwich. I don't want cheese. I don't want nothing. Anyway, my point is, everything's traumatic from that perspective. Like,
well, I think of similar to that.
It's weaponized.
These days, everybody's offended.
Yes, everyone's triggered. And again, without going into the whole woke thing, because that's another discussion, but my point is that when we take the word boundaries and we start to say, I don't want to do this, therefore I'm going to use the excuse of boundaries, we're using psychobabble, right? This term to excuse our behavior. When you say something and I want to cancel you or make you feel bad or make you look bad, or I don't want any sort of conflict in my life, I then can say you're triggering me. So I want you to say what I want you to say, and I'm pointing deliberately. I want you to say what I want you to say, because if you don't, all hell breaks loose. So to me, that's a big issue that I see occurring. And I really feel that as a psychologist, one of the things that I'm ashamed of is to see a field which I care a lot about, a lot of stuff being taken from that field and used to be able to excuse bad behavior or to excuse the desire that some people have for the poor me syndrome or victimization. So just wanted to get your thoughts overall of that, and also what are the things that frustrate you about not modern society, because we could be here all night, but about the personal development world or professional development, the gurus, the experts, all that sort of jazz.
Yeah, so back to the boundaries thing. I think part of what that triggers for me, to use that word, but in a different way, is people not taking responsibility for their own lives. In other words, it's very easy to say, well, I'm feeling this way because you triggered me by doing this, or because this happened in my past, or because, or because that word, don't use that word triggers me. And I think, and maybe this is my, pushing 60, starting to sound like an old man, but to me, that's all about saying the world is happening to me, right? It's this idea of an external locus of control. I'm being controlled by you've triggered me. And whether that's at a macro level or that's two people talking and saying, well, I'm acting this way because you said this and it's forcing me to do this. No, you're put on your big boy pants or your big girl pants on and take responsibility for your life. So I are there time, hey, there's a lot when I think of, more the woke culture. There are a lot of words I used when I was a kid. There are a lot of things I did and were acceptable when I was a kid that are totally not acceptable now. And I look at it and go, oh my God, thank God. Thank God. When I think about what I used to say and how I used to act, there are times that I look at that and go, thank God the world has changed and that's not acceptable anymore. And I also think that people are much too easily offended and impacted by things today that are excuses to not take responsibility for their own lives. I'll be honest. I say this in with all honesty. I can't remember the last time I was offended by something or someone. For me, someone can say something I could agree with or disagree with it, but I'm not offended by it. It doesn't trigger me. I know you can't say that to me. No, I could agree or disagree, but you could say it.
I agree with you. I'm on the same side as you in this issue, in the sense that everything you've said makes sense. The one thing I'll say is that from that perspective, and as you quite rightly pointed out, back in the day, you said certain words and you think to yourself, oh my goodness, I can't believe we said that. Thank goodness the world has moved on. I think the most important thing to really see this is that the whole nature of taking responsibility is important. And we want to balance that, because one of the biggest mistakes I see is if you're offended by everything, then what you're doing is you're galvanizing the other side to say, and I've said this myself, and I'm ashamed that I have said this myself, but it's something that I think can well be proven true in some cases. Inverted commas, well, not proven true, but you can't say anything these days. Now, that's just hyperbole. That's an exaggeration.
Right.
And that's an excuse that a lot of people will make because they want to get permission to say whatever. And the problem is, if you're offended by everything, you're offended by nothing. And therefore, it just becomes two sides. Whereas if it's more judicious and you go, these words are hurtful because of this. This is hurtful because of that. And you're more understanding and putting that across. I think that's a route forward, because it's not like the worst way to try to change someone's mind is to demonize them because they don't do what you tell them to do, wagging your finger.
What becomes difficult is, it's like, wait a minute, are we allowed to call it this today? Like we called it this yesterday. What do we call, like sometimes the words change like every year what we could use. I literally saw, and this is true, but it's crazy extreme, on social media, someone instead of using the word died, said someone was unalived. And I'm like, what?
I can
Is that really a thing now? No, I hope that's not a thing. I don't think it's a thing.
I can't believe you don't know that, bro.
But I'm so embarrassed.
I can one
So
up
sorry,
you.
I said my mother died. She was unalived 8 months ago.
I can one up you because there was an example. I can't remember. This is a few months ago, maybe last year actually, and some celebrity came out and sort of said, and I'm pretty sure it was legit. It wasn't like just a parody. They said something along the lines of, from their perspective, they think that aliens should not be called aliens anymore. They should be called extraterrestrials. Or maybe it was the opposite. No, I think it was aliens should not be called aliens anymore. They should be called extraterrestrials. Because again, the extraterrestrials might be offended. But if you're extraterrestrial, I presume that's less offensive. So that's the worst I've heard. Or the best I've heard, depending on your point of view. One more question for you, pal. From your own point of view, who is one thinker or writer that you believe more people should know about, right? So one person that maybe they've written a book, maybe they've got a podcast, maybe they've influenced you when you were younger and you read their teachings or whatever.
It's a tough one because I told you earlier, I've gone on a diet from reading anything. I've been reading history books a lot lately. A thinker that people ought to know more about.
And this could be a more grandiose than just someone that you've read about recently, something that of all time.
Wow. You're gonna have to edit some pauses out of this because you're causing me to
Don't worry,
think.
We're adding a lot of this
podcast. I don't know. Thinking of a lot of people, but they're not a secret. Well, like everybody knows who they are.
Just because they know who they are doesn't mean that they're like people read them or study them.
So it's a particular book. There is a organization called the Arbinger Institute. And the first book that came out was called Leadership and Self-Deception. Have you read that?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
To me, and that's a book it's very difficult to describe real quickly, but it's, when I read it, it helped me to realize that the way I looked at the world was that I was kind of the star of this movie and everyone around were just extras in my way to getting what I wanted. And the book really kind of sets you straight and taught me a lot about how to look at other people in a much more productive way than I was. And that book and those ideas, and I have most of my clients read it and it's kind of life-changing for them as it was for me. It's the kind of ideas that I believe, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, if everyone in the Middle East believed in what they communicate and they kind of preach in that book, I think there'd be peace in the Middle East. It's that big an idea.
Wow.
So I think, the Leadership and Self-Deception, their second book is called The Anatomy of Peace. They have a third one that's not quite as good. But just getting a better understanding of how we think of ourselves related to other people, as simplistic as that concept seems, most of us do it wrong. I did it wrong for many years and still mostly get it wrong, but I need books like that to remind me every once in a while to say, wait a minute, I got to think about other people differently than I'm thinking about them. So I'd say that those ideas in that book is something I wish more people knew about. Where can people find out more about you and tell us a little bit about your podcast and the kind of people that you help and the work that you do? Best place for people to find out about me is Mike-Goldman.com. betterleadership.com. That's my website, the house of everything. My podcast is called the Better Leadership Team Show. And, you know, what I do all day, every day when I'm not doing something like this is work with leadership teams to help them. My whole goal in life is to create great leadership teams so they can create great companies. I've got a new book I'm working on that's all about how to make sure you're assessing, developing, coaching talent and making the right decisions to cut the cord, on talent. So, the way I do that is through being a leadership team coach with a small number of clients, doing workshops and keynotes with a bigger group of folks, writing books, and soon enough software is going to be on the way.
As always, mate, an absolute pleasure. Love our chats. And thanks very much for being a part of the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
That's all from us. Thank you very much. You've been watching the Changing Minds podcast. May the force be with all of you, and may you continue to live the best life possible. See you soon.